Today I'm talking about another salesman's challenge. This is one that was given to me, the video idea. Can an upright piano sound like a grand piano? And I didn't answer him immediately. I'll tell you why. Hi, this is Ted Barsley with Alamo Piano Galleries. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And also, if you get a chance, go in and look at alamopianogalleries.com online. You can shop our store and shop a lot of the pianos that we talk about. And there's also a complete line of piano and keyboard videos that are on the YouTube channel itself. So go through and scroll. And I'm going to mention a couple of those videos for this video today. Particularly, there's a George Winston temperament tuning, there's a Werkmeister, and I believe a Kernberger tuning. I want to reference those videos as examples of what I'm talking about today. And I believe mostly all of those are done on a grand piano. Today I have an upright, and it's tuned to equal temperament. And this piano has been used in videos before. But what I wanted to talk about, and the reason why I didn't have an immediate answer for our salesman when he said, hey man, you ought to do a video on making upright sound like a grand and everyone will look at it. Yeah, but my thinking is, what are they going to be listening to? And is it possible to make an upright sound like a grand? And the reason why I didn't answer him immediately is because I had listened to years ago, at least 30 years ago, I think, a Marcus Robertson album where he had, the liner notes had him like in a piano workshop or a warehouse. But it's interesting because he played and recorded that album on a lot of different people's pianos, particularly around the New Orleans area, and from what I remember, right? And a lot of those pianos sounded like grand pianos. And it wasn't until after I started really reading the details on whose piano he played and what model it was that I looked them up, that a lot of those were uprights. And yeah, some of them sounded like grand pianos. So how was that accomplished? And I'm starting to think that's more of a recording process. However, tuning has a lot to do with it because I've taken the smaller the piano is in the store, from a spinet all the way up to even a large upright. I've put that George Winston temperament on there, which is essentially a flatter temperament that favors fifths, but it also has the least amount of dip in the curve in a tuning. And this is the hardest thing for me with this video. I could not find any real usable graphics to demonstrate. One of the best graphics I know exists on a keyboard screen, which I don't have the model in stock, so I can't go through and take pictures of what a C scale would look like with that forced temperament on it. But an equal temperament, everything is zero. The distance between every single one of the 12 notes is the same. When you get to a Werkmeister or a Kernberger or even the other expanded equal temperament, which is kind of a better explanation for George Winston's tuning, it's more of an expanded equal temperament focused on the fifths and the octaves. However, the idea is you could take each one of the keys and write minus 2 plus 5 so that you know the sense difference to tune and the offset so that you can just compare a couple of them instead of looking at all these squiggly lines. We have demonstrated, I believe, on the George Winston temperament, there's a graphic demonstration that shows the graph is pretty flat and short in terms of the curving. So what that does is that opens up the piano if you're playing it like a pianist, where most of the music is done within the reach of an octave. So your octaves are, I mean, the perfect eighths, fourths, and fifths have essentially no real aural beats between them. So the cycles of the strings are going almost perfectly in sync. When they go off, you start getting waves and it starts sounding chorusy or like someone's putting an effect on it. When you add that to the fact that the entire treble section has 3 strings per note, it's not like tuning a monochord. If this were a monochord piano, and I want to find an old clunk around here and make it a monochord. So there's 1 string, probably the middle string in the treble section throughout the whole upper section of the piano. It won't be as loud. However, it'll be real easy to change temperament and tuning, and it'll almost sound precise because there won't be any unisons that are off. When you hit one key, you're supposed to hear one note without any waves in it. If you hear waves or beats or cycles, well, then it's out of tune. It's not perfect. And I also believe that's the main reason why, besides the cost and the convenience, that digital pianos have boomed so much in the last 30 years. It's mostly because, actually, it's been almost 40 years. It's mostly because the instrument is always in tune. And for people that are practicing or composing or practicing singing or other instrumentalists, it's really nice to have a nice tuned instrument. And I grew up where there were no digital pianos, and you played and your mood was determined based on how good or how badly the piano was tuned. There were some pianos that I liked the way they were out of tune because I just played access to a lot of pianos, lived on a military base. Public access to pianos was a lot different in the 60s and 70s than it is now. However, back to the tuning. Equal temperament is what the standard tuning is straight across the board. I have done other temperaments, particularly, I haven't really mentioned the kind of music that they're for. Some of them is orchestral music and some of it is dated. And in that instant, the composer will tell you how he wants the temperament. And in old pieces of manuscript music, a lot of times the composer would tell you exactly which the concert pitch was tuned to. Like A instead of 440, a lot of times was 436 or 432. There used to be a lot of different alternative methods to tuning. And since music was always localized, it was always localized. There wasn't any way to broadcast music from any other country into another country until like within pretty much the last century. So with music being millennial old and tunings always being localized, different areas and different parts of Europe had different tuning standards. So just getting that tuning standard didn't come around until at least within the last 100 years. Up until then, there was always different areas and different types of music. For solo piano recordings, where the artist wants to write something that's darker sounding or boxier sounding or more constrictive, you could use alternative tunings. In fact, a lot of music, particularly Bach, struggled with the concept of the well-tuned instrument. And there's basically, if you go through and read all of his music and learn all of it, good luck. The idea is that you'll find out that he was never really happy with any one particular scale, and he seemed to invent his own when it didn't fit his piece, or at least the pleasingness of the sound of his piece. And if you change from the white keys to the black keys on a keyboard instrument, well, a lot of times you tune the white keys perfectly the way you like at the expense of pushing the differences off on the black keys. So when you jump up to the black keys, the whole instrument sounds entirely different because the scale is going to be stretched differently within each one of those intervals that you play. So with all that in mind, I don't really have any examples to play except for our historic concept of different tunings that were featured in some of the different videos. In terms of the graphic, I think what I'm going to do is sit down and come up with an easy way to explain each one of these tunings so I can hold them up, because I didn't really quite think about that. I thought they would be readily available, particularly if you could pull it off of the screen of a digital piano. You put the tuning on there and you take a picture of it. It's pretty easy to transfer and get onto the video. We did that with some of the others to show off the tuning curves. But in terms of how far do you push the notes, and are they pushed flat or are they pushed sharp, and which ones are getting pushed, it gives you an idea of this tuning was set up to be mostly played in the key of C or A minor, which means that it doesn't jump to the black keys a whole lot. If there's something that is like Chopin pieces, you may want to at one time have tuned that piano to where it favored all of the black keys. And in that instance, you could focus mainly on 4 white keys, which would be E and B and C and F, because those are the 2 half steps on a piano that don't really have a black key between them. So when you're playing and using every single black key and with a 7-note scale, you're going to have about 2 white keys in there. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about recording procedures and what you can do to make an upright piano sound bigger. And the reason why I mentioned that George Winston tuning is because it does space out the fifths and the octaves as much as you can without them being out of tune. So that makes it sound like a larger instrument. And if you've ever seen someone play in concert, you're really impressed when you see a larger instrument on a stage and a guy comes out there, and if it's even the slightest bit out of tune, it catches even the most amateur ears like, man, that doesn't sound like as good as it should. And sometimes people wonder, like, why does a guy come out in mid-piano concert at the break, besides selling CDs and beverages and retune the piano? It does go out that easy. It does not take much to put a piano out, particularly where all the beautiful areas up in the higher end, which are great, and where a lot of the dramatic passages come from, the lighter passages, even things that sound like toy pianos. If it's not tuned perfectly, it won't sound as pristine or as playful or as childish or whatever it's magical is. That sound gets lost if the piano is detuned or just not perfectly tuned. And there are sometimes, particularly if you go to an old church that doesn't get used much and all of a sudden they're going to have a revival, you go in there and they didn't tune the piano for the revival. Well, there's nothing, I guess, more localized sounding than an out-of-tune piano with an out-of-tune congregation singing some old gospel, hymns and church music. It's kind of, well, you see it in movies a lot because it does have a dramatic effect. And how that is recorded in the movie has a lot to do. And I think if the movie's not about music, if it's a horror movie, it won't be a tuned piano. A piano out of tune kind of goes synonymous with Chucky and all those kind of characters because it's creepy sounding and it doesn't sound right and it throws you off. And these are dramatic effects that are used in Hollywood first and foremost before they're going to show up in a song. Is it scary enough to be a special effect in a movie, and what kind of movie? And there are some creepy things you can do on pianos just with vibrating the strings and using the instrument in a different way. And I'm not going to get into that. That's another different topic of a video. And I like the way that the Blue Man Group abuses that piano. They have that frame out there and they hit it with that sledgehammer. That to me is a cool sound. Natural reverb, you have enough strings, you could get all kind of delay of any kind of electric signal going through it. Imagine 228 or 36 strings of a piano all wired together, and that's your spring reverb unit. And if you pounded on it, you could get them all to start moving. There's tons of creepy sounds you can make with something like a piano or any other instrument, particularly just a violin bow and a saw. So they have used that musically. How do you tune a saw when you're playing it? It's all done by ear to just try to keep the instrument in pitch. I knew a guy that he was a bass player, didn't play a real bass, played a wash tub. Of course, he could play an upright acoustic bass, but he was real big on a wash tub. And a wash tub bass is all done by ear. Every single note has to be pulled to pitch. And he was a real interesting character because I thought he had one of the coolest jobs. And he worked out at the observatory, so he was kind of a neat guy. Back to tuning, the recording process. How do you record an upright piano to get it to sound bigger? And just doing a little bit of research and a lot of time I spent recording pianos, not all of them in tune. We're using an Earthworks PN40 microphone that we've used on all of our piano recordings for at least about the last maybe 2.5 years. Today we have it set up different, and I'm not really going to do a lot of demonstration on it, but the idea is that at least you can see how it works. These are gooseneck condenser microphones that fit across the top of a piano harp or anywhere that you can get it to fit, particularly on grand pianos and uprights. It's given us the cleanest, biggest, fattest recordings we could get. If I wanted to make this sound like a grand piano, I would need more than what I have right here because you have to put a little auditory trickery in there. One is pull the piano off the wall and put a similar type, but not the exact same microphone. It's important that you use different configured microphones that have the same kind of ranges so that you're getting a different type of manufacturer's EQ built into the item. I would recommend 2 microphones about a foot off the soundboard in the back, and then another one maybe about 4 to 5, 6 feet in the back at the height of the soundboard focused at the middle. Also a couple either in the back, up high, about 8 feet behind. Blending all of those as stereo pairs, you could come up with making this piano sound a lot more spacious without putting a lot of space into the room and keeping a lot of the room sound out. If you record like that, you basically want a dead room. If you're in a live room, you may want to take advantage of the live reverb and make sure you record a separate channel with a far-off microphone pointed at the roof so you have that hollow sound you could always loop in there whenever you wanted to. That will give you a great big fat sound on an upright piano. Will it sound like a grand? I guess it depends on the kind of music you're playing, how inspired you are, and also how well the piano is tuned. And I can't say enough about tuning pianos. I've been out on vacation, not even a week. I come back and some of my favorite pianos are a little out of tune. Some of them are a little waved off. In tuning, they have some waves in them. And most of them are still pretty much in tune. It's just the higher registers that seem to go out quite a bit. If you have questions and comments about tuning, about making an upright piano sound like a grand piano, I am open to suggestions. Off the top of my head, I still believe it's a possibility because that Marcus Robertson album had some great sounding pianos and they belong to some people that he's known throughout his life that he's played with. They were uprights in their house or in their studio or in their rehearsal areas, and he made a whole album out of where I think every song has a different piano, and that to me was an exciting album to listen to just as much as I enjoyed that David Lantz album that has a different piano for almost every single track. Marcus Robertson didn't get to travel around Europe and all those exotic locations for this album though, but at the same time, I like that concept of an album because overall, when you put on the album, you can tell it was just recorded and engineered so those pianos sounded as good as they possibly could, but the whole concept doesn't sound like it's a bunch of different pianos from recordings taken all over the place. It sounds like it was just studio engineered and studio recorded quality, but it is possible to make an upright sound like a grand. Until then, we'll look for you at alamopianogalleries.com. Thank you for your time.